Good afternoon, everyone. Those that don't know me, my name's Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. You're all very welcome along this afternoon. Particularly pleased to welcome colleagues from HMRC who have the responsibility as our tax authority to help operate what happens in the Irish Sea in terms of our supply chain from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. As people will be aware, there are some significant changes coming from the 1st of May in terms of the administrative requirement for traders who are bringing goods into Northern Ireland to ensure that they meet their customs requirements around business to business parcels in particular. Very pleased to have some speakers along this afternoon from HMRC who will take you through what those changes are, what the responsibilities are, where those responsibilities lie for you as a trader, and some further guidance and support that may be available. We are going to have a couple of presenters and then followed by a question and answer session. Please do use the opportunity to ask some questions either by using the Q&A function or the chat function that's available here on Teams. If you have a question, then please do try to keep it as general as possible. Obviously, HMRC aren't here to provide specific consulting advice to you and your specific business. So please do think about questions that might be relevant to an audience wider than just your business itself. However, if there are very specific questions relating to your business, do feel free to get in contact with us at Manufacturing Northern Ireland. We have a good relationship with colleagues from HMRC, and we found that if we have specific inquiries, they are able to provide some guidance or point us to some guidance that may be able to resolve that issue or problem for you or bring that clarity that you require. So do try to keep your questions general, but if there's things that are specific, get in touch directly with us. We will be recording the session. Obviously, we'll share that recording and the slides that have been provided after the event, so you can rewatch or share with all our colleagues at a later date. As I said, the changes come into place as part of the Windsor Framework from the 1st of May. They are pretty significant for those that are sending business-to-business parcels in particular across the Irish Sea. So today's timely, with only a couple of weeks to run until that new system comes into place, to do whatever you can as a business to prepare your systems, processes, and people, but also help with your supply chain. Talk to those people as we begin to see these new responsibilities begin to become live from that 1st of May date. I'm going to hand over now to some colleagues from HMRC. Carmel Crawford from HMRC will start us off with Catherine Ruffles picking up about halfway through the presentation. And we also have Simon Pettigrew who will be there to assist with any questions that you may have in the Q&A function or the chat function. Carmel, I'll hand over yourself and we'll see everybody in a few minutes' time once the presentation's been completed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar event where we'll talk to you about the new arrangements for parcels moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland under the Windsor Framework. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today just to engage with us, and thank you to Manufacturing NI for arranging this session. As you will all hopefully be aware, following the guidance issued in September 2024, there's been extensive preparatory work undertaken for the new arrangements for the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland by parcels or freight as set out in the Windsor Framework. As a result, and subject to the relevant procedures, the new arrangements as set out in the Windsor Framework are planned to take effect from the 1st of May 2025. So the aim of today is to explain what the new arrangements are and how you can continue to receive parcels from Great Britain under the new arrangements. We'll also spend some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have, and please do input any into the chat and we'll aim to get through as many of these as possible. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Connor. Thank you. I would just like to introduce myself and my colleagues who will be speaking to you today. So I'm Carmel Crawford. I lead on stakeholder engagement for retail, manufacturing and the pharmaceutical and medicine sectors. I'm also joined by Simon Pettigrew, who heads up the Northern Ireland Customs Stakeholder Engagement Team, and he leads on supporting traders in relation to the new arrangements for business-to-business parcels. I'm also joined by Catherine Ruffles, who leads on the stakeholder engagement aspect for B2B parcels as well. So thank you both for joining us today. So moving on to the next slide, we've set out some terminology on this slide that will be helpful to understand for the purposes of the webinar. So firstly, we have the UK Internal Market Scheme. This is a HMRC authorisation that allows eligible goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland to be moved as not at risk if they're brought into Northern Ireland for sale to or final use by end consumers located in the UK. So not at risk goods will not be charged duty if they're entering Northern Ireland from free circulation in Great Britain. So we also have the internal market movement information, which you may have heard to refer to as IMI. And this is a simplified data set which requires less information to be submitted to the Custom Declaration Service or CDS. And in order to use the simplified data set, eligible goods must be not at risk under UKIMS or the UK Internal Market Scheme. And then finally, there we have the simplified processes for internal market movements, referred to as SPIM. They're goods movements available to traders under the Windsor Framework, where eligible goods are moving from GB to Northern Ireland via a direct movement, and they're not at risk under the UK Internal Market Scheme. So moving on to the next slide. You'll be aware that following the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, the UK government and the EU agreed the Northern Ireland Protocol, which came into effect in January 2021. In February 2023, the UK and the EU agreed the Windsor Framework, which addresses the genuine concerns around the difficulties of the Northern Ireland Protocol by providing a new arrangement to enhance the smooth flow of trade within the UK internal market. So under the Windsor Framework, the UK and the EU agreed new arrangements for moving parcels between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So for traders who are sending or receiving business-to-business parcel movements from GB to Northern Ireland, either the sending or receiving business will need to be authorised under UKIMS in order to move the goods without the need for a full customs declaration and without incurring duty. So you'll still be able to receive parcels where neither business is authorised under UKIMS. However, these will move at risk and will require a full customs declaration. And you may also be liable to pay the applicable EU rate of duty. So there will also be specific arrangements for consumer parcel movements under the Windsor Framework, but they won't require any customs declarations and they won't incur any duty. So this will be for consumer to consumer, business to consumer and consumer to business parcels. But we won't be covering these today. We have a link to our Windsor Framework resource page, which will be shared at the end of the webinar, and that includes a link to recordings of our previous webinars. So please do watch those if consumer parcel movements are of interest. So the recordings of our webinars set out what the new arrangements are for both business and consumer parcels, but it is important to speak to your parcel carrier to understand their processes. And this is because different carriers might have their own commercial processes for moving goods, and each carrier's processes might be slightly different from each other. So it's important to discuss this with them ahead of the 1st of May. So I'll now pass you on to Catherine, who will firstly speak to you about the UK Internal Market Scheme. On the next slide, please. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Carmel mentioned, I'll be talking you through the UK Internal Market Scheme, as well as how to send parcels not at risk and at risk. And I'll be taking you through some illustrated parcel journeys too. So now the UK Internal Market Scheme is a HMRC authorisation that allows you to move eligible goods as not at risk of entering the EU, as Carmel explained a bit earlier on in the presentation. So if you are a business sending or receiving B2B parcels, you can apply to be authorised under the scheme if you're not already. So this means that eligible goods will not require a full customs declaration, and they will not be charged duty if they're being sent from a business in Great Britain to a business in Northern Ireland. To be authorised under UKIMS, we'll look at your compliance history, for example, whether you have followed taxation and customs rules over the last 3 years. We'll also look at your financial standing, your record keeping systems, controls and evidence, and also whether you are established in the UK. So if you're not established in the UK or have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland, you'll need to have an indirect customs representative in Northern Ireland, for example, your parcel carrier. You should check your eligibility to apply for UKIMS on gov.uk. And if you are eligible, you shouldn't delay in applying ahead of the new arrangements to take effect, which is subject to all of the relevant procedures agreed to take place on the 1st of May. If you're not authorised under UKIMS, you'll still be able to receive business-to-business parcels from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, but these parcels will be sent at risk. So parcels sent at risk will require a full customs declaration, so your parcel carrier may need additional information from you or your supplier. Duty may also be due at the applicable EU rate of duty, and that will be calculated according to the Northern Ireland online tariff. But it's important to note where duty is payable, there are options to waive, relieve, or reclaim any duty through schemes such as the Customs Duty Waiver Scheme or the Duty Reimbursement Scheme, which we'll go on into further detail about later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So to move goods not at risk, there are 3 main requirements. At least one party will need to hold the UKIMS authorisation, and that party will act as the importer of record. The goods will also need to be for sale or final use by end consumers located in the UK, for instance, the business receiving the parcel or its customers if it's sold onwards. And the goods should also not fall into Category 1 goods under the Windsor Framework. So the most common group of Category 1 goods are those subject to EU trade defence measures, but it also includes quotas where the quota is being claimed by the importer, or total bans and prohibitions, and goods also covered by sanctions. So to move goods under UKIMS, your parcel carrier will need details of the UKIMS authorised party's authorisation number and the associated EORI number. So that's the Economic Operator Registration and Identification number to move these goods not at risk under UKIMS. And as a result, no duty will be charged. We are introducing a simplified process for internal market movements, which for the purposes of parcels, we should think of as the new data set, or IMI, which is internal market movement information. So if you're authorised for UKIMS, your parcel carrier can use the simplified data set if your goods meet the criteria to move using UKIMS authorisation as not at risk of entering the EU, or are standard or Category 2 goods. As before, and also probably part of the same process, your parcel carrier will need details of the UKIMS authorised party's authorization number and the associated EORI number to move the goods using the simplified process for internal market movements. And again, as a result, no duty is charged and your parcel carrier can use the simplified data set so that less information is required by them. Next slide, please. So, yeah, brilliant, thank you. If the goods are moved by businesses and neither are authorised under UKIMS or the goods are not eligible to move as not at risk of entering the EU, these parcels will require a full customs declaration. So your parcel carrier may need additional information from you or your supplier compared to now. Duty may also be due at the applicable rate of EU duty, which we've explained can be calculated according to the Northern Ireland online tariff. But options are available to waive duty or claim reimbursement, as mentioned, through the customs duty waiver scheme or the duty reimbursement scheme. And we will be going into further detail on those in the next slide. It's also important to note here that goods are automatically considered at risk if they'll be subject to processing in Northern Ireland, unless exemptions as set out in the guidance are met. So in which case, these goods can move not at risk if they meet the exemptions. These include if the UKIMS authorised party has an annual turnover of less than £2 million, or if they meet specific sectoral exemptions. So these include if you're importing sheep meat, poultry and beef using UK tariff rate quotas into Northern Ireland from countries outside of the UK and EU, or if your goods are for one of the following approved purposes. So therefore, it's food for sale to end consumers in the UK. If they're relating to construction, so where the processed goods form a permanent part of a structure that's constructed and located in Northern Ireland by the importer or one subsequent entity. If they're being used to directly provide health or care services in Northern Ireland by the importer or one subsequent entity, or if they're being used for non-profit activities in Northern Ireland by the importer or one subsequent entity where there is no subsequent sale of the processed goods. Or finally, they're being used for the final use of animal feed on premises located in Northern Ireland by the importer or one subsequent entity. And just to point out, when we say one subsequent entity for those particular arrangements, we mean if you process the goods, the next person in the supply chain can confirm that the goods are for sale or final use by consumers located in the UK. So you or the sending business in Great Britain should tell your parcel carrier if you're receiving goods that will be subject to processing in Northern Ireland, unless those additional processing criteria are met. Next slide, please. So as we've discussed, for at-risk goods, customs duty may be charged, but there are a number of ways to either waive, relieve, or reclaim duty that might be charged. So firstly, if the applicable rate of EU duty for the goods is zero, you'll not be charged any duty. If the customs value of the parcel is £135 or less, the duty can be relieved to ensure that you will not have to pay this. If the goods are GB origin, you'll also be able to claim preference under the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. If the goods were previously in free circulation in the EU before moving to Great Britain and then on to Northern Ireland, you might also be able to reclaim returned goods relief. If the goods are declared into a special procedure on entry into Northern Ireland, the at-risk duty can be suspended until they're released into free circulation and the end destination of the goods is known. You may also be able to make use of your de minimis state aid allowance, to claim a waiver under the customs duty waiver scheme. And one question that we're asked quite frequently is whether this will be available for parcel movements, and we can confirm that it is. So as we mentioned earlier, it is important to speak to your parcel carrier to understand their processes and how they'll be told if you're claiming one of the waivers or reliefs that we've spoken about. And ultimately, if there is no way to waive or relieve the duty up front, and you can evidence that the goods did not enter the EU, you can claim this back via the duty reimbursement scheme. So if none of those are an option, you will need to pay duty at the applicable rate of EU duty, and you can use the trade tariff tool to look up any duty rates. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to go through some illustrated parcel journeys with you to show how certain parcel movements from GB to NI are carried out and the type of information that will be required. So this is the illustrated journey for a business-to-business parcel movement that is authorised under UKIMS, but it's worth noting that this one and the next illustrative journey are purely illustrative, and the who completing the steps might change based on yours and your parcel operator's commercial arrangements. So the steps on the top left of the slide just outline the process required ahead of sending the parcel if you're wanting to send under UKIMS. So essentially making that UKIMS application and HMRC granting authorisation. You'll note here that the sending business provides details of which UKIMS authorisation and EORI number to use, but this can be the sending or the receiving business, and that will depend on the commercial arrangements that are in place with the parcel operator. So you or the sending business should speak with your parcel carrier to just understand how they want to receive this information. Your parcel carrier will then submit internal market movement information on the Customs Declaration Service as part of their door-to-door service, and they will complete a safety and security declaration before the parcel is delivered to you as the Northern Ireland business. And as we discussed, there's no duty due on goods moving under UKIMS. In the bottom right-hand box, you can see the data that the parcel carrier will need for movements under UKIMS. So this includes either the sender or recipient's UKIMS number and the associated EORI number. And if this is not the sender's, they'll also need the EORI number of the GB sender. So the parcel carrier will also need an accurate goods description at item level, the country of origin, and other standard commercial information such as the total weight and value, as well as confirmation that the goods meet the criteria to move as not at risk under UKIMS. And yeah, as mentioned, you'll note there is no duty due as this movement has been authorised under UKIMS. Next slide, please. So this is the illustrated journey for a business-to-business parcel movement that is not authorised under UKIMS. So either there is no authorised business or the goods are at risk of entering the EU. You'll note one of the main differences here from moving with UKIMS is that the FPO submits a customs declaration on the Customs Declaration Service rather than internal market movement information. So the customs declaration is the same as required now for freight movements, and it includes a 10-digit commodity code, and further additional information may also be required as a result of it not being a UKIMS movement. The fast parcel operator or FPOs that we've got on screen still completes a safety and security declaration though, and there'll only be risk or intelligence-led checks on good. Depending on the Incoterms, which the parcel carrier will need to know alongside the customs value of the parcel, the importer of record might also have to pay an applicable rate of EU duty if the parcel is more than £135, subject to any waivers or reliefs that we discussed previously. The remaining data required by the parcel operator is largely similar to the data required to send under UKIMS, and additionally you may need to provide the sending and receiving business's economic importer of record number. Next slide, please. So we've put on screen here some links to guidance that we have on gov.uk, and we'll also pop these in the sidebar for ease. These include links to the resource page and the reimbursement schemes that we have discussed. So if you just bear with me for 1 second, and I can copy and paste these into the sidebar.
I've got it now, Catherine, so I'll just put them in just now.
Oh, brilliant. Mine might have just sent before yours, Simon, but thank you. Next slide, please. So we'll now move on to the Q&A section. So I'll hand back to Steve to talk us through some of those, and then we'll open the floor to any questions that have been submitted throughout the webinar.
Catherine, thanks very much. I've been on many webinars where you've got 40 or 50 slides, so to keep them down to less than a dozen, it's a good place to start and leaves time for conversation. If Simon and Carmel and yourself can choose between yourselves who answers these questions, then that would be useful. We have some questions in the Q&A, some in the chat, and I have some of my own as well. So we'll try to rattle through these as best we can in the next 30 minutes or so maximum. You said there that one of the two parties that are sending or receiving the goods can be UKIMS registered. If the sender in GB can they become UKIMS registered, and is that sufficient for them to be used as the importer of record?
Thanks, Stephen. I can come in on that one. So yes, so if your GB supplier is UKIMS authorised and they are able to obtain the relevant information and evidence that the goods are eligible to move under that scheme, i.e. that they are for final sale or end use to the consumer located in Northern Ireland, and obviously meeting the specific requirements if the goods are subject to processing, then that is enough. They are then able to act as the importer of record, and that will then allow those goods to move duty-free.
So it's useful for traders here in Northern Ireland to talk at an early stage or as early as possible with their suppliers in GB, particularly those that they would do regular business with, to ensure that they're UKIMS registered, because the big challenge has always been that because we operate through these systems 365 days a year for the last 4 years, that the level of knowledge is pretty high in Northern Ireland, but that the challenge has always been in GB. So there's an opportunity here for traders in Northern Ireland to help HMRC and help themselves ensure that this system runs as smoothly as possible, and to speak to their suppliers in GB about potentially, where appropriate, becoming UKIMS registered, and that way they can have simplified procedures. Obviously, manufacturers are commercial processors. Manufacturers are the very definition is that we take materials, we either process them with machines or our hands, and we turn them into products that are enjoyed by customers, not just in Northern Ireland and the UK, but in Ireland and the EU and globally as well. That being the case, is UKIMS registration achievable by Northern Ireland's manufacturers? And even though they are commercial processors, are there examples where UKIMS can be used, for instance, in stuff that is only solely to be used within the factory, for instance? So I often give the example of the tea bags for the tea room, or stationery for the offices, or whatever. So if you can give us a bit of insight into the fact that if you believe that manufacturers in Northern Ireland can still become UKIMS registered despite the fact that they are commercial processors by definition.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. That is a good question, and I suppose there's the two separate points to that I'll try and cover off. So, for the goods that you are bringing in, processing and manufacturing, and then subsequently selling on, whether that is within the United Kingdom or the EU or rest of the world, the requirements that Catherine set out around UK internal markets are in place. So the goods are automatically treated at risk for that purpose, unless they meet one of the specific exemptions, which includes the turnover being less than £2 million, or specific sectoral exemptions such as construction in Northern Ireland, food or feed, food for final consumption in Northern Ireland. So there are some, and there are a number of businesses who are UKIMS authorised to meet those requirements. I appreciate also that won't cover every business in every scenario that does manufacture or process goods in Northern Ireland, but that is the arrangements in place. But the second point you sort of touched on there is the goods that are maybe being moved for internal purposes. So this, as you say, tea bags, but it could also be IT equipment, things that you're using within your internal business to help your business function that aren't actually being processed and aren't actually part of the materials that you are manufacturing. You can definitely get UKIMS for those purposes. And it doesn't, the processing requirements there do not apply. So if it's things, if you're getting UKIMS purely for goods that you're moving for your own internal business purposes, you would be able to meet the evidence requirements that they are for final use by the end consumer, and that end consumer would be your business because you are using it for your internal business purposes.
Thanks, Simon. And obviously we get, as part of our supply chains to the manufacturing community here, there are EU origin goods that work their way to Great Britain, where there may be a small bit of processing so they don't pick up a UK origin, or they may well be broken down from a full container load to a number of parcels that would be shipped to Leicestershire as well as Lurgan in that regard. So Catherine said there that there are systems and processes like returned goods relief, that EU origin goods distributed to Northern Ireland via GB may be available as a means to avoid any tariff challenge. Can you just kind of clarify that process a little bit for people, just so that because we do have a number of businesses that get EU origin goods that do end up with a tariff being applied in Northern Ireland just because they're distributed from GB. Can you just kind of explain how that process works, or how people go about finding out more information about using that process?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So again, probably two things there. And just to clarify, if the goods move directly from the EU to Northern Ireland, there is no customs processes or duties applied on those goods. So those goods are treated as in free circulation and continue to move without any duty or any customs processes. If the goods as part of the supply chain move to Great Britain and are cleared into free circulation in Great Britain and then subsequently move into Northern Ireland, that is where returns good relief can come into play. So there are some specifics around when return good relief can be claimed, and it has to be the same goods that has moved into Great Britain and then moved back, and we have quite extensive guidance on that. I can pop that in the sidebar for any business who is maybe uncertain whether they will or will not be able to claim that. In terms of the actual way of making that claim, that is part of the declaration that's submitted to CDS. So for your parcels, your parcel operator would be instructed to claim returned good relief on those goods, and they can put that onto the declaration on CDS for the goods that are at risk, and that means the duty isn't actually charged on that specific good. So there's nothing to do in terms of formally claiming it. But as I said, if you're moving parcels, the parcel operator will need to know if that's what you're doing to make sure that is done at the point of movement, so you're not then inadvertently charged duty.
And does return good relief, so you mentioned there that if that piece of the supply chain that arrives in a parcel, or even a container for that matter, because return good relief is a customs facilitation that's available across all those movements. But if a business in Northern Ireland had an EU origin good that was distributed via parcels to Northern Ireland, does return good relief work for them in terms of that onward sale to the EU and not just the sale within the United Kingdom?
Yeah, so just to clarify, sorry, Stephen, so we're talking here goods coming into Northern Ireland and then ultimately being sold into the EU again after they come into Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so this could be an engine that's made in Germany. It's distributed to Northern Ireland via an agent in Great Britain. It then moves to Northern Ireland, or distributed to Northern Ireland, and it's put into a machine, a larger machine, that then is sold to a customer in the EU. Under the Windsor Framework, potentially that picks up a tariff on that movement from GB into NI, but is return good relief an opportunity to avoid that tariff if you can demonstrate that it's been sold either in the in the UK, obviously, or within the EU, or is there a gap there that needs to be overcome?
So the return good relief would be claimed on the point of movement between Great Britain and Northern Ireland to say that the goods were previously in free circulation in the EU at that point in time, and that then allows the previous duty to be paid to allow the duty charged on GB and I to be relieved. So what then happens to the goods is not overly relevant to that process, because if the goods are then staying in the United Kingdom, there is no duty being paid, and if the goods are then sold into the EU, again they have union status and continue to move without any further processes. Yeah. So they're already in free circulation at that point, and there's no further duty or processes due.
So the critical thing here is to inform your fast parcel operator that returns good relief is going to be applied to this to avoid any risk of a tariff being picked up in that journey.
Definitely.
In terms of other areas, in terms of avoiding financial penalty or loss, we know that the duty reimbursement scheme is available for stuff that is demonstrably remaining within the United Kingdom's market, and potentially even third country outside of the EU. We know there's about 900 claims to that duty reimbursement scheme in the last calendar year. In terms of the burden of proof that's required for traders, what do they need to be thinking about now? Because obviously parcels are a larger by volume number of movements than other types of movements from GB to NI. What type of information should they begin to capture? And is there anything they need to do with their FPO at this stage, or is it just purely their own administrative responsibility to look after that after the event?
So in terms of the duty reimbursement scheme, obviously conscious that we're talking to businesses who are processors in this world, so I'll sort of focus on that. So there will be some additional information required on top of sort of the information that shows that the goods ultimately stayed either in the UK market or, as you say, were exported to a country outside of both the UK or the EU. And we have some guidance again on this on gov.uk, which I think was in the links that we shared earlier, and it talks through if an example on the guidance there is if you are constructing laptops in Northern Ireland, you're bringing in parts for that laptop, you would need to identify the part of the laptop and where that subsequent laptop was then distributed to be able to claim that reimbursement. So you're looking at where the goods you're bringing in are used, how they're manufactured, and then ultimately where those goods end up. In terms of the process with the parcel operator, the people who can claim the reimbursement are the importer of record or their representative. So if you, as the importer of record, are claiming a reimbursement through the duty reimbursement scheme, you may need some information from the parcel operator, such as the MRN from CDS. That's obviously important for us to show that the duty was firstly paid before we can reimburse it, and secondly allow you to then link that to where the goods ultimately ended up. So if you are looking to claim under the duty reimbursement scheme, again, as much as everything, important to speak with your parcel operators to make sure you're giving them the right information, but they're also giving you the information back that you need to make a relevant claim if that's the case.
And Catherine, in your examples, provided a couple of processes, one UKIMS registered, one not UKIMS registered. The current system and the system that's been operating in the Irish Sea is a two-step process. So priority has been provided over ensuring flow, so goods flow. So there's a minimum requirement at the top, but that's that's then followed up by supplementary declarations after the event. I'm assuming that this process with your parcel operator and moving these parcels follows that same process. So the first stage is the basic requirements in order to ensure that the parcel continues to move, but there will be a responsibility by the trader, the importer, to ensure that the supplementary declaration is completed after the event. And that's the moment that people may have a tariff to pay or otherwise. The tariff's not collected in order to remove or in order to ensure that it continues to move, is my question.
Would you like me to cover that one, Catherine? I think that comes into some of the stuff we've been discussing elsewhere with some businesses and parcel operators. Because I think you're right, Stephen. So obviously the current process that's in place, largely through businesses who have been operating through the TSS, is minimum data up front, allows the goods to move, and then do a supplementary declaration which finalises the process of whether goods are at risk or not at risk, and then the relevant duty is paid. In the world of parcels, it's slightly different. Not in terms of that being available. Firstly, the trader support service may not be available for parcels, and the parcel operator will probably complete the customs process as part of their door-to-door service. So that's one reason why we say obviously it's important to speak with your parcel carrier, either your supplier and the supply chain, to understand how data will be provided and who will be doing that. It's definitely available for parcel operators to operate in that way, where they collect minimum information up front and complete the supplementary declaration. But for them, that is a commercial choice. So I think the important thing here is to understand what way the parcel operator is operating, whether they're operating the same model, which is using like entry and declarant records and allowing the goods to move up front, or whether they will require some more additional information up front. And then again, speak with the supply chain to understand how that process will be met via either yourself or your supplier. I think just for what it's worth, I think our understanding is that most parcel operators will operate in a similar way to the trader support service, which will allow them to clear the information post movement to hopefully offer some reassurance that if the data is not provided up front, it won't be a blocker to the parcels moving. But again, it is a commercial decision and not something that we as HMRC could sort of confirm or deny that that's what every parcel operator is going to be doing.
I'll move into the questions in the chat and in the Q&A. Catherine, you mentioned the kind of category 1 goods, but there's a question here about, can you give some examples of what standard or category 2 goods would be? It's essentially anything that's not subject to restrictions or legal restrictions, international restrictions, like firearms, that sort of stuff. So it's stuff outside of those kind of prohibitive goods.
Sorry, I don't think my mic's unmuting when I pull it down. Yeah, so for the category 2 goods, they're the ones that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So I can just get the list up here as the example list. Sorry, for the category 1 goods. So essentially they are subject to EU trade defence measures, but it also includes quotas where a quota is being claimed by the importer, or where there are total bans. So that's goods that are covered by sanctions or prohibitions, etc.
Sure, and obviously there's the potential, given what President Trump has announced, that the EU will apply some countermeasures, and they've published a list of what goods they may apply a tariff on in response to President Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminium. So that category 1, those goods subject to a safeguarding duty, may be automatically viewed as being at risk, and UKIMS cannot be applied to those if those EU trade defence measures are implemented in 90 days' time.
Yeah, so to comment on that, yes, you're right, Stephen. So if the EU bring in any retaliatory measures, and if they are treated as trade defence measures, then that may take them out of the scope of the the UKIMS and treat them as Category 1 goods, which again would make them at risk of entering the EU automatically. As we say, that there are the facilitations in place that would remain. So things like the customs duty waiver scheme, that would definitely be available to allow businesses not just to waive the import tariff, but also any safeguarding measure that's applied to that as well. And subsequently, the duty reimbursement scheme is also there if the goods do not enter the EU subsequently after processing.
Okay, thank you. There's a question in the chat function specifically around returns good relief, the DAP Incoterms, recovery and stuff. So rather than answering this on here, it might be worth just picking that up, and even back through me, I can get the answer to the individual business involved, if that's okay, if somebody can kind of have a look at that after our event this morning or this afternoon. Bear with me here, down through the questions. Question here is, if we decide not to use UKIMS, is the full customs declaration required similar to the current system that issues supplementary declarations and pays the applicable duty? I think we've answered that. Is that it looks like your fast parcel operator will do the full process, but there are ways in which they can recover the additional data after the movement has taken place. So it's the equivalent of doing the supplementary declaration on your behalf. I think that's the summary of what you said.
Yes, that's right, Stephen.
The £135 or €150 limit, is that per parcel or is it per consignment?
So I think the answer here is at the total value of the parcel. So it's a total value of the goods in the parcel. Obviously, if depending on how the goods are sent and how parcel operators process them, it might be slightly different. So again, important to speak with the parcel operators to understand their process. But if you're receiving 3 parcels that with the contents within those parcels are no more than £135, then the duty can be relieved on those parcels.
Thank you. If a small proportion of goods coming in from GB are classed as at risk, say less than 5%, does that mean that all the goods coming into Northern Ireland must be classed as at risk and are subject to duty for an individual entity?
So I would say not necessarily. And it depends perhaps on what is happening with the movements when they come into Northern Ireland. So if you're bringing in, say, a load of goods for stock and you just say, well, I know roughly about 5% of my goods end up in the EU and 95 stay in the the UK market, but you don't actually have that assurance before at the point the goods move, then I would say that would be an at-risk movement. However, if you have knowledge of where the goods are going at the point of movement, i.e. you are fulfilling an order, for example, and you have an order for 100 things and 5 of those things are going and staying in the UK market or in Northern Ireland or being exported, and 5 of those back to Great Britain, or 95 of those things are if 5 of those things are going into the EU and 95 of those things are staying in the UK market, then you can claim the 2 different rates for those. So the 95 goods staying in the UK market can move under UKIMS, and the 5 that you know are going into the EU market can be declared at risk.
So it's one parcel with 100 things in it. 95 are staying within the UK and Northern Ireland. 5 are potentially at risk of moving to the EU. So essentially, you're apportioning that 5% of the risk at that point may be subject to a tariff, for instance.
So not necessarily apportionment. It's based on your knowledge of where the goods are going. So if you don't have any knowledge and you just know, for example, 5% of my goods will go in the future, and it's not based on any distinct knowledge, then I think that whole parcel would be at risk. If, for example, you do have knowledge of those 100 things, that 5 of them are definitely going to the EU and 95 are definitely staying because you're fulfilling specific orders or it is goods that are for specific purposes, then that can be declared at different levels. But not to say that if it's just based on, well, over a year, 5% of my goods will go to the EU, so I can then declare those at 5%. It's based on the knowledge of those particular goods at the point of movement.
Okay, so that's specific parcel, not as a business as a whole.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. You said earlier there that that the kind of two-stage process that a lot of traders have become accustomed to with the trader support service isn't necessarily applied in this case, because the fast parcel operator will look after the entire customs process. People have become used to TSS, but the question here is that that advice seems to be lacking from TSS at this point in time, because they're probably a step removed from this entire process now. And I suppose, is there, aside from the guidance that you've put into the chat, Catherine, put into the chat a little earlier, is there an intention to have more examples, more guidance as we kind of ramp up towards the 1st of May, go live on this?
Doing that. Yeah, so it's just important to note on the guidance links that are in the chat, there is a resource page, and that includes links to previous webinars that we have done, which are really detailed in terms of, parcel movements, consumer parcel movements, business to business parcel movements. There are more illustrative parcel journeys in those webinars. We're also sending out comms to supply chains on specific data requirements. We've also updated our parcels guidance recently on gov.uk to make sure that it's really up to date. So it should be quite comprehensive in terms of what's on those links, and especially the resource page. It looks like there's just one link, but it links out to various things. And I think there's about 5 webinar recordings on that. So yeah, there is quite a lot in terms of guidance on those links. Simon, I'll pass to you if you want to add in anything more.
No, I think just to add that we have recently just updated the parcels guidance on gov.uk to reflect the new arrangements under the Windsor Framework. So the links in there reflect the new arrangements that are coming into effect from the 1st of May. So that gives the full detail of that. And we're continuing sort of additional comms both to businesses who have UKIMS, GB suppliers, and those involved in the movement of parcels to make sure everyone's aware of the new arrangements and the steps they need to take.
And I'll repeat the offer that if people had specific inquiries, they can come to me, and I'll see if I can get them an answer. But also, if the people did take the opportunity now to review the guidance that is available, and for stuff that's not clear in it, that's really helpful feedback for HMRC, so that more people get the clarity that they actually require. Just on a point of clarity, the £135 limit, does that apply even if the goods are viewed as being as an at-risk good, or is it just wiped away? So if it's a business or a commercial processor that's what's at risk, but as long as it's under £135, there's a simplified process, full stop.
Yes, so if it's £135, regardless of whether it's at risk of entering the EU, the duty can be relieved at the point of movement. Obviously, if the goods are not at risk and moving under UKIMS, there is no duty charged anyway. So the really fully helps when it's an at-risk movement, because it then relieves the EU rates duty that would be applied otherwise.
Sure. We've been introduced over the last number of years to lots of acronyms, and there's a new one in this process called IMI. IMMI. So IMI requires parcel value and item description. Is there any dispensation, though, to give vague descriptions and value where contents are high-value luxury goods, that were, rather than stating the exact contents and the value? Basically, people are worried that it would be flagging potential high-value items that could be subject to theft or whatever. So people are concerned about the security of their items traveling if they give too much detail on the information requirement took by the parcel operator.
So that is an interesting question. It's not one that I'd heard of much recently, but I think the sort of what what our sort of guidance is that we require is an accurate good description as possible. And the rationale for that is it allows the parcel operator then to meet their requirements when submitting information to HMRC, and the value should be an accurate value of the value of the goods that are moving. So I appreciate that point in terms of theft, but I would definitely make sure that if you are moving high value goods and you want additional securities and guarantees, make sure you are speaking with your parcel operator to understand their processes. But as I say, in terms of the data that HMRC requires, it should be as accurate as possible.
Thank you. We've just another 143 questions to go. You'll be glad to hear. Not really. No, there's only a handful more. As a Northern Ireland-based company, do suppliers stroke customers based in GB have to use their GB or our XI EORI number when sending parcels to us as the importer of record and using the UKIMS number? So which numbers do you use? Do the sender use their GB EORI or the Northern Ireland EORI? And when does that accompany the UKIMS number?
So it would depend on whose UKIMS number is being used for the parcel. So if the GB supplier is acting as the UKIMS authorised business for that movement, the only UKIMS authorisation number and the EORI number that's required is theirs, because they would be acting as importer of record on that movement as it's under their authorisation. If, for example, they are moving the goods and that you as NI businesses receiving those goods are acting as the UKIMS authorised business and importer of records, then they would the parcel operator would definitely need the UKIMS authorisation for yourself and the associated EORI. And how you give that to the parcel operator could either be directly through your own engagement with them or via your supplier. That's a commercial process to understand, again, between your supply chain of how best to do that. But again, the EORI and the UKIMS authorisation is dependent on who's actually acting as the UKIMS business for that, and that's the relevant UKIMS and EORI number that's required.
And for both of those parties, is the full 32-character alphanumeric number needing to be used and supplied and disclosed on each one of those occasions?
So the parcel carrier would definitely need that to allow the goods to move under UKIMS. If they did not have the appropriate UKIMS authorisation number and the EORI number corresponding with that, then the CDS would not accept that, and it may charge the duty in error. So definitely need to make sure your parcel carrier has the appropriate information to ensure that doesn't happen. Again, depending on how you want to do that, whether you give that direct to the parcel carrier or give that to your supplier is again a commercial choice for the supply chain.
And obviously the parcel process is a bit simpler from the main customs process, and there's another party there providing a service in between, which is helpful. There's a question here about under UKIMS we do not need to supply a commodity code but a description of the goods instead. Why do we still need the country of origin in that process?
So that is a good question, and it links to the categorization points we were discussing earlier. So that the country of origin can be the determining factor of whether the goods are, say, category 1 or standard goods. So, for example, if you're moving a goods that came from France, that would quite easily be standard goods, potentially, depending on what the goods are. But however, if it's coming from countries subject to sanctions, like Russia, for example, then that would make it a category 1 good. So the origin is very, very helpful to make sure that the goods are following the correct process. But the goods description is all that's required for the parcel operator to meet their requirements when submitting that information to HMRC.
We're going to go over a couple of minutes, so I hope everybody's okay with that, but just to kind of close off some of these questions, if you don't mind.
Yep.
We're UKIMS authorised, but are a manufacturing company with a turnover greater than £2 million. Can we declare our goods processing as not at risk? This is a common misconception by many businesses. UKIMS is available to you for the stuff that's within your business, etc., etc. But as a commercial processor, you should be declaring goods at risk as the general principle if you're more than 2 million turnover.
Yes, unless you do meet any of those sectoral exemptions that we
Of course,
talked through and that are on the guidance. But yes, if you're over £2 million and do not meet those sectoral exemptions, then the goods should be treated at risk at the point of movement.
Sure. I'm going to, because I don't want to leave this one question hanging. I asked about maybe coming back after the event with a specific answer, but we'll give it a rattle now and see and hope for the best. But what is the process for a Northern Ireland trader to follow where a fast parcel operator has submitted a declaration and has not applied preference or returns good relief correctly, and that this is costing the Northern Ireland trader a duty? The questioner is given a bit of context here, which is the goods are shipped under a DAP Incoterms. So the Northern Ireland trader has not supplied the data to the fast parcel operator, nor has done the entry. So the supplier, DAP terms, the receiver here in Northern Ireland, so the importer, hasn't been engaged in that process. But clearly there's been a mistake, both in terms of the information required or the correct preference, or returns good relief has not been notified, and the business here ends up paying that duty. Is there a process to correct that entry? Is there a process to recover that cost, etc., etc.?
So yes, there is a process if declaration's been completed incorrectly. I've tried to answer that in the sidebar, but there is a link to guidance here. The form is called a C285, and that if you have overpaid import duty, you can claim a repayment. You do have to provide information to explain what you're claiming it back for and the rationale for that. But there is an electronic form that can do that. But obviously, as we've kind of touched on a few times, I think really important to speak with parcel operators and supply chain to understand and try and prevent that happening in the first place. I understand that might not always be possible in every scenario, given how fast parcel movements are and the frequency of those. So in the case where there is a charge of duty for an erroneous reason, then that can be reclaimed through that process.
Because we do know that there's, over the last number of years, the people submitting entries to TSS, for instance, aren't always the either the sender from GB nor the receiver in Northern Ireland, but a third party in between, a logistics company, customs agent, or whoever it may well be. And obviously, given the volume that will likely increase with parcels being subject to full customs, this may be a bigger problem going forward. So ensuring that system works in an efficient way, and people are clear about how that they can either correct that record or more particularly recover where whatever additional cost is really important to people. Carmel, Catherine and Simon, our time is up. I run the risk of continuing on and getting more questions, but if people do have specific questions, then feel free to contact myself. I'll speak with our colleagues that are on the screen at the moment and try to find that guidance where possible. Thank you, all three of you, for your input today. Thank you to others for submitting questions. We will be sharing a recording on the slides. If there are specific questions, do ask us. If there's specific clarity about the guidance that's being provided, that would be really helpful for all traders. So if you feel that guidance needs to be updated, then do let us know about that also. And I just want to finish off by saying thanks once more, and we'll see you all again. Thank you.